Before starring as a jaded cop in Antoine Fuqua's 2009 interconnected police ensemble Brooklyn's Finest, Richard Gere played a far worse example in Mike Figgis' sophomore feature after his 1988 neo-noir debut Stormy Monday, which garnered favorable reviews from critics like Roger Ebert and Janet Maslin. Henry Bean would pen a second-produced screenplay after Running Brave, a 1983 biopic based on the Lakota track and field athlete Billy Mills, winner of the gold medal in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics for the 10,000-meter men's race, the only American ever as of this date to win the long-distance running event at the Summer Olympics Games. So the film opens on an evening out in Los Angeles as we're introduced to three uniformed policemen with Richard Gere as Dennis Peck, Billy Baldwin as Van Stretch, and Michael Beach as Dorian Fletcher. With the white boys at a residence, they stumble upon enough evidence to issue an arrest. But before they can make any moves, they're cop-blocked by their black buddy who shoots first and asks questions later on a fleeing suspect, who turns out to be unarmed, by the way. But not for long as Peck plants a knife on the deceased and gives Fletcher the choice of either a career setback or a corrupt comeback. But manslaughter and dirty cops aside, we're introduced to honest ex-cop Raymond Avila, played by Andy Garcia, best known at the time for playing in The Untouchables in the worst Godfather movie. Anyway, the Latin lawman is promoted to the eponymous division, welcomed by several colleagues we'll never see or hear from again until meeting training officer Sergeant Amy Wallace, played by Laurie Metcalf of Roseanne fame. Anyway, Wallace hands Avila his first internal affairs assignment on alleged policeman's conduct by Van Stretch, an old pal from Avila's police academy days who now stands in the way of the infamous Blue Wall of Silence, a code which protects crooked cops like Peck or incompetent ones like Dorian Fletcher. But as for now, the black guy is safe, much safer than a white woman as Van lays a smackdown on his wife Penny, whom he accuses of cucking him like Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull. Their lovers' quarrel becomes a family affair when their young minivan named Sean appears, played by a pre-Hobbit Elijah Woods. Peck's DV senses begin tingling as he springs into action on the tribe called Stretch, disrupting the alleged cuck's hands-on approach to marriage and fatherhood. So the couple's counseling cop pulls his insecure, hot-headed buddy aside to hear his grievances. But in the midst of their session, Van attempts to nasally self-medicate until Peck slaps some sense into him, leaving the woman-beating wretch weeping like a woman over his wife's alleged home-wrecking.
You can act like a man!
But after the shake-up, they make up in some totally heterosexual male bonding.
What are you, homo?
The Silver Fox won't be the only man in Van's life, as another budding bromance seems to be on the horizon between Avila and Stretch. That's when a jilted Peck confirms that the former cop is the ops, spoiling their camaraderie and possibly a career. So Avila and Wallace put Stretch to the test, but he never yields or folds under pressure.
Come on, you know that's nigger bullshit.
Well, at least they got that out of him. Later, Avila and Wallace interview Lady Stretch, who reveals an obvious impression her worst half left on her. Assault and battery aside, she denies all accusations against her husband like a good wife, including their domestic dust-ups, and ends their inquiry as she walks away with her Rolex and Mercedes, which is rather expensive taste for a middle-class couple in Los Angeles. Meanwhile, as Fletcher attempts to make an arrest without lethal force, Peck swoops in and cop blocks his black buddy into nabbing his street-walking stoolie among fellow officers witnessing the whole kerfuffle. Their altercation becomes physical as Peck publicly commits assault and emasculates Fletcher like a little bitch, all in the goal of setting pretty black woman free to roam the streets again.
Be free!
Later, Peck and Avila meet one another off the clock among cops and thoughts as the internal affairs agent asks about Van's wife and the possibility of another man stretching out Mrs. Stretch. But Peck turns the tables on Avila and toys with him about his wife, Kathleen, played by Nancy Travis. Anyway, Peck red pills Avila on the laws of attraction and tempts the honest cops with some chocolate instead of the vanilla he has at home. But the faithful agent curbs his appetite for hot cocoa and exits while taking a dig at Peck's expense.
You can do better, Key. Very clever, Raymond.
As for now, the heat is still on Stretch as AI scour his bank records and find a massive discrepancy. Van and his unwilling sparring partner have a combined annual income of at least 80 racks, but were somehow able to buy a house for more than 5 times than what they earned in Granada Hills, an affluent neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley. Also in a case of more corruption, Stretch works part-time for a convicted felon named Rudy Moore, who has shady dealings and give Peck a mysterious job for a couple known as the Rocuses, a name aforementioned by Peck's wife Heather, played by Annabella Sciorra. Later, the harlot liberating cop meets Mr. and Mrs. Rokas at dinner as hubby Steven tells Peck the good and the bad. The good news is that Steven runs a successful titling company owned by his immigrant parents. The bad news is that Steven considers them a liability and wants them handled the Menendez brothers' way. But as Steven wants immediate action done to his parents, Peck wants some action of his own in the family with Mrs. Rokas.
Don't leave the girl around me, true player for real.
But the mom and pop murder plot comes at a cheap price of 15 racks, which Peck finds insulting as he chastises the parasitic couple for setting such a low bar for a high-profile hit. So Peck flexes some alpha male dominance on both Mr. and Mrs. Rokas as he suggests a more lucrative offer they can't refuse.
Can I trust you?
Of course, you can trust me.
Avila and Wallace try building a case against Peck, but reach a dead end amid the Roca's mom and pop murder plot. The same goes for Stretch as he walks scot-free, but not in the eyes of Peck, who frisked him for a wire during tea time with his stepdaughter, who happens to be one of many children in Peck's brood, as it's revealed he has 8 kids through several marriages.
This guy fucks, am I right?
He has 3 kids with wife number 1, another 3 with wife number 2, 2 kids from wife number 3, and another one on the way with wife number 4, making 9, which of course would drive anyone insane, corrupt, or a little bit of both. But hefty alimony and child support aside, Peck has another encounter with Avila as he asserts his machismo with multiple wives and a legion of children to his counterpart's childless and possibly sexless marriage. But Peck crosses the line as he goes from rude to lewd about Avila's wife Kathleen.
Stay away from wives. Don't talk about it.
Avila gets more heated than a habanero and opens a can of whoop ass on the white boy in broad daylight. Now this could have gone the cliche route where Avila is suspended without pay while our hero plays vigilante. But apparently, Peck practices the blue wall of silence even for his enemies as Avila goes about his day and asks for a background check on him and his harem. Later, as the tension settles between Avila and Peck, Stretch pours his heart out on the phone to his wife and begs for emotional support as he worries more about the jailhouse than the doghouse. But the penitentiary is the least of his concerns as Van's worst fear come true as another man's penetrating Penny.
She smashed the homie!
This was bound to happen as Peck rushed to the rescue and acted more sensible and masculine than Van with his emotional crybaby beta male behavior. Regardless of Van's weak and cowardly conduct, this egregious violation of bro code is just the beginning of betrayal as Dirty D lures Van to an even more suspicious Van like a short eyes with candy. And as he slides the door open, and it's at this moment that Dennis Peck is a far worse son of a bitch than Alonzo Harris in Training Day. Not only does he smash his partner's wife, he also makes her a widow, a diabolical feat not even achieved by Harris in a 2-hour runtime.
Fucked up, man.
On to cover his ass, he pulls a Colin Sullivan from The Departed. Now all Peck has to do is report about a cop killer, but it looks like he has to do the job himself as Van Stretch pleads for life from the worst friend you could ever imagine. A third potential victim narrowly escapes with his life in the van, but this van won't be quite so lucky. As the ambulance arrives, Peck reels from the tragedy of possible incrimination while Avila deals with the comedy of his love life while Kathleen accuses him of doing the horizontal mambo with his partner Wallace, only for Raymond to confirm what smarter viewers already know about Wallace and her love life.
Lesbian.
Bushwhacking aside, Avila's alphabet-friendly colleague called to announce the death of Van Stretch, which makes Kathleen a bit of a bitch in this scenario.
Bitch.
The strictly platonic duo arrive to the double homicide to grieve the dead corrupt bastard as they glower at another corrupt bastard held responsible. But before Avila and Wallace kidnap Dennis the Menace, they first need the whereabouts of the illicit Latino on the lam who can corroborate the murders, and the best way to find a vanished Hispanic, legal or otherwise, is through another Hispanic as Avila meets cousin Gregory to find him. In the meantime, the LAPD commemorates the fallen wife beater as Widowmaker Peck attempts to console his side piece and mend the broken family he created. But life goes on as Avila manipulates would-be homicide detective Dorian Fletcher, whose position was attained by the even more manipulative Peck, to work on the Van Stretch homicide case. The investigation could spell doom for the rookie because taking down Peck could only backfire on floundering Fletcher. But in spite of his reservations, he acquiesces to Peck's takedown as cousin Gregory affirms the high-tailing Hispanic is a Mexican drug dealer prepared for one last score before returning to the border. The next day, Avila, Wallace, and Fletcher wait for the suspected narco known as Demetrio to appear, who later be positively identified by cousin Gregory. Everything goes according to plan until the SWAT team shows up, blowing their cover and leading Demetrio to bust a cap on the not-so-undercover brother. The SWAT team opens fire on the criminal Latinos and nearly turned one of their own Latinos into Swiss queso. Luckily, the driver is hit as he crashes the getaway car into a wall, and a foot chase ensues as the hombres go mano-a-mano shooting it out until Demetrio runs out of bullets. That's when Avila goes into his bilingual bag and negotiates with Fletcher Shooter for a confession. But the only judge this Mexican will meet would be his maker when the SWAT team exacts some American justice.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
But before meeting Diablo, Demetrio confesses to his sins as well as Peck's culpability prior to his untimely muerte, which is now inadmissible in a court of law and wouldn't have held much weight had he lived. You know, blasting a cop and all. Later, we learned that Fletch wound up like Stretch, who had the worst luck from the very beginning. First, the brother commits manslaughter before finishing the word freeze. Then he fails to book a hooker in while Peck publicly punks him like a buck-broken buster.
Nigga, use a bitch.
And finally, he becomes a homicide statistic on his first homicide case. It would be alleged that Fletcher told Peck about the sting and the latter informed the SWAT, ultimately bungling their case with a dead cop and a dead man's worthless confession. But RIP to Dorian Fletcher. You were a father, husband, friend,
And a lousy cup.
After stacking up multiple L's throughout, Avila catches his biggest one yet as his marriage seems to be about as dead as Stretcher and Fletcher when he sees Peck dining with his wife Kathleen, who wrongly accused Avila of having an affair with his lady-loving partner. Now the shoe seems to be on the other foot with Avila as worried as the late cuckold Stretch. Avila does everything in his power to avoid that fate as he searches high and low for his missing missus to no avail. With Avila as stretched as Van Stretch, Peck adds insult to injury as he makes up for their last confrontation, only in a much more private setting this time.
Good thinking.
But Peck adds more salt to the wound when he asserts what Avila feared most.
The fuck, Joe, bitch!
Peck alleges to a trip down the Hershey Highway, making Kathleen out to be a freak who spread the cheeks. But the coup de grace when the copulating cop tells Avila to wipe himself off with Kathleen's panties, mirroring their first scuffle.
Doesn't feel good, does it?
After that hugely emasculating embarrassment, Avila tries repairing his marriage and regain the cojones he once had. So he takes Kathleen aside to talk, but she's no habla. He then tries to tickle her pink, but she's not amused, and neither is director Mike Figgis over here. But the gloves come off as the panties come out, as Avila rages over the thought of his wife sleeping with the enemy, an epic portrayal that either drives some man 6 feet under or living 6 by 8. Director Mike Figgis calls for order, but the lawman is out of order as Avila acts like a complete cabron, lashing out at Figgis and knocking him over into some poor waiter.
Oh, shocking.
And as if possessed by the ghost of Van Stretch, Avila knocks Kathleen over into another poor waiter.
How terrible.
Luckily, nobody reported a frantic Hispanic who went loco as Avila freely goes from pissed off loser to piss drunk boozer at Cousin Gregory's nightclub. And like Tom Cruise in Eyes Wide Shut, the liquored up Latino has haunting visions of his wife getting plowed by another man.
You dirty slime!
Images of the erotic and chaotic blur into one another as Avila's urge for wrath overpowers lust as he strongly desires ending the Lothario lawman once and for all. But ultimately, Avila's efforts are far too impotent for the seemingly untouchable corrupt cop.
Don't fuck with me.
But Avila siestas all a tequila-fueled fantasy before going to his casi esposa. He gives her the silent treatment, she gives him the violent treatment, and the I Love Lucy type couple come to a truce when Kathleen confesses that Peck was gaslighting Avila all along.
Gotcha, bitch.
The internal affairs agent threatens to 187 his wife if she ever cucks him like Penny Stretch, and the lovers rekindle their amour once more and finally achieve what Kidman and Cruise failed to do in Stanley Kubrick's 2.5-hour swan song.
Fuck.
And like that, their marriage is as solid as a rock while Peck's love life gets rocky when Wallace scours the bank records of his housewives, who hold $2 to $3 million in real estate equity with side piece Penny signing the mortgages.
She ain't real, y'all! She ain't real!
But the dirty cop and the filthy thought never yield or falter to the massive fraud charges as Avila and Wallace begin closing in on their corruption. Avila wonders why Penny's protecting a pesky pest like Peck, but Wallace's woman's intuition suspects she's been giving up the box to LA's most wanted cop.
She smashed the homie!
And Penny kindly tells him to leave after this accusation.
Get out of my house!
But before any potential arrest, Dorian Fletcher will be laid to rest as all the cops gather around to attend the funeral and pay their condolences. Everyone except Avila, who wants another round with Dennis the Menace, but just goes to show bad luck follows the ill-fated cop even in death. But the smooth criminal cop walks away scot-free with the murders of Van Stretch and the parents of Stephen Arocas, the evil Thailand tycoon who gets his just desserts as he's cucked before his very eyes.
It's my vast, extensive experience with wives.
While Mrs. Arocas gets drilled, Peck's fourth wife is grilled and she crumbles under pressure, tipping them off to the Arocases. But after Peck gets his rocks off, he tosses a 25 to have her knocked off.
You son of a bitch!
The orphan cuck has the gall to shoot, but not the balls to kill the son of a bitch.
Steven, that's my foot.
Proving how much of a beta male provider Stephen Arocas is and why his wife Tover disrespects him like Little Bill and Boogie Nights.
You gotta transfer work. She fucks everybody.
Avila and Wallace arrive at the Arocas beachside mansion and find both Trollope and Cuckold as dead as Mr. Arocas' parents, which is what these scumbags deserve as far as I'm concerned.
Fuck him.
But an actual tragedy ensues when Peck tries adding another cop to his hit list as he shoots Wallace.
He just shot a broad.
Avila runs to his partner's aid, twice I might add, and Wallace is later rushed to the hospital, which is unfortunately the last we'll ever see of her. As for Dirty D, a corrupt cop whose only options at this point are the jail yard or the graveyard, pulls one last desperate move by taunting the Avilas once again. However, their internal affairs agent gets his huevos back and actually has the chance to defend his wife's honor.
How romantic.
Peck would make another disparaging remark about a woman close to Avila and gets knocked on his ass like in their first violent encounter. Raymond is ready to take him into custody, but Peck would rather commit suicide by cop than rotting away in the booty house. And like in the first act of corruption we've seen, Peck pulls a knife from out his boot, leaving Raymond with no other choice but to finally exact justice.
Judgment time.
And Peck's demise parallels with the dead suspect he framed for attempted murder from the very opening. And that's it. He dies an officer, but not a gentleman. Released in a dumping ground in January, Internal Affairs grossed a meager box office of only $27 million on a $15 million budget. Despite being a commercial dud, this became Richard Gere's favorite film of his own and one of his 2 comeback vehicles, including Pretty Woman, the Gary Marshall romantic comedy juggernaut that earned $432 million worldwide on a $14 million budget. Though Marshall's film became a notable Hollywood smash, the modern-day fairy tale garnered mediocre reviews, with film critic Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader calling the fantasy a misogynistic celebration of big business and prostitution, whereas this thriller garnered acclaim from critics like Pauline Kael, Janet Maslin, Mick LaSalle, and Siskel and Ebert. Pacino, De Niro, Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and many others were considered for the role of Dennis Peck, but turned down the offer to play the smarmy cop who put the bad in badge. Gere played duplicitous, amoral characters before, like as Bill in Terrence Malick's 1978 classic Days of Heaven, but never has he sunk to this level of depravity and evil. Even when playing smug defense attorneys like Martin Vale in Primal Fear and Billy Flynn in Chicago, his character still possessed a shred of integrity and honor in both films, delivering terrific performances. But Gere's incredible as a slimy and sleazy LAPD cop, which is a welcome departure from all the schmaltzy romance films that hampered his acting talent like Matthew McConaughey in The Knots. Andy Garcia, garnering a Best Supporting Actor Oscar nod for the 3rd installment of The Godfather, gives a compelling performance as a man pushed to the limits and watching the abyss as his life could have become just as violent and turbulent as Peck's. Billy Baldwin and Michael Beach give solid performances as ethical polar opposites risking their lives on a thin blue line. Laurie Metcalf as Garcia's lesbian partner excellently balances comic relief.
He likes pussy is what he likes.
As well as drama.
You're fucking him, are you?
And Nancy Travis, Faye Grant, and Annabella Sciorra are finding their roles as beleaguered cop wives. But in spite of all this praise, the film isn't without its flaws. My biggest nitpick, more so than this poorly edited sequence, is the shooting of Amy Wallace. The film just leaves us in suspense as to whether or not she lives or dies. When a villain asks the physician about her condition, it's rather oblique when it could have been remedied with lines that she either made a recovery or not. Leaving audiences in the dark after an integral character is left bleeding out is a huge oversight and simply just shoddy writing. But overall, the movie has its redeeming qualities. For example, my favorite scene is Raymond shellacking in the elevator. Not only is it unexpected, but it's unprovoked as Peck's payback comes with salacious allegations, which turned out to be false, but a prevarication that would lead Raymond into a tailspin of DV with infidelity and murder on his mind. This is the eventual breaking point every protagonist faces, from Travis Bickle getting dumped by Betsy before going into a suicidal rage, or Arthur Fleck getting attacked before embracing his maniacal alter ego. As for my favorite line, it had to be this.
Tell you what about wives. They're all looking for strange, just like you and me. I don't care if it's your wife, his wife, my wife, it's all the same. At least you're looking right. You see a pretty girl, you look.
While Peck attempts to corrupt the villa, his lascivious stance rings true in nature. In an earlier scene, Raymond does just that when an attractive woman walks by, catching his eye, proving Peck's point. And a dozen years later, Peck's point couldn't be any clearer when a younger, sexier, and certainly more virile guy comes along that seems more exciting to a middle-aged wife than her loving but boring older husband who looks like he does ads for boner pills. But altogether, I recommend watching this crime gem. It's one of Mike Figgis' most lauded films next to the Browning version and Leaving Las Vegas, in an experimental career that some might find pretentious or inaccessible. Henry Bean crafted an intriguing thriller with deep cover, but weaves a more psychological story with unsettling tension on one of the most underrated villains of the 90s in Dennis Peck. If you're into films about infighting among good cops and bad cops, watch Sidney Lumet's Serpico, Curtis Hansen's LA Confidential, and Andrew Lau and Alan Mock's Infernal Affairs. Well, that about does it for me.